Hello, and welcome to the Cognitive Edge, where we explore the ideas, strategies, and technologies that can improve teaching and learning. I am Dr. Daniel Sable, and I wanted to stop for a second to say hi to everybody and say I hope everybody's doing well. I was out sick for a few days and running behind my twin daughters, so here we are today, and we're going to talk about some ideas for the start of the school year that students may or may not be able to use, but they may be some good strategies for others. So here we go. Um, so today, like I said, we're discussing something nearly every college student does, but very few students are formally taught how to do well, and that's taking notes and studying. And students frequently believe that academic success depends on spending more time with their textbooks. Um, they reread chapters, highlight entire pages, copy lecture slides, and review the same material repeatedly. These activities may feel productive, but feeling busy is not the same as learning. Um, the real question is not how long did you study? The better question that I would probably ask is, you know, what did your brain have to do while you were studying? Effective learning requires students to retrieve information, organize ideas, make connections, identify gaps in their understanding, and apply knowledge in unfamiliar situations. Um, Good note taking and study strategies make these mental processes possible. Now, just an FYI, note taking is definitely a thinking activity. Um, Many students treat note taking as like transcription. They attempt to write down every sentence that a professor will throw out at them. That approach really creates a record of the class, but it does not necessarily create understanding. Effective note taking requires students to decide what is important. They must be able to distinguish central ideas from supporting ideas. They have to be able to connect new information to earlier lessons. Um, they have to work on translating complicated concepts. Um, Instead of asking, what did the professor say? Students should ask, what is the main idea? Why does this matter? How does this connect to what I already know? And what example helps explain it? Um, what am I still confused about? These questions transform note taking from copying into thinking. Listen, there's an old saying that says, um, it's listen first and write second. Students sometimes they become so engaged recording information that they stop listening to the explanation. Their hands, they're moving, but their ears are not able to process the amount of information that's thrown out in the class. So a better approach is to listen for a complete idea, understand its meaning, and then write a shortened version in your own words. Professors often provide verbal clues when something is important. Um, this will be important later. The main point is, or remember the difference between. Trying to think of some of the others. A common mistake is, I've seen so many. One is, let me give you an example. That's a big one because if you're providing examples, then the students should be picking up that they are going to find that again, and it's important to their career. And these phrases, they're just signals. Students should pay attention to definitions, to comparisons, cause and effect relationships, repeated concepts, examples, and connection really between topics. Totally. Do not try to capture everything. Capture the structure of the lesson. Okay. There's something out there called the Cornell note-taking method. Probably one of the best. One thing is that it's, note-taking. It's the second biggest part of learning. The largest section is main notes taken during class, and then small columns should be used on the sides with keywords and concepts, and then the section at the bottom is basically reserved for a brief summary. So during class, record the essential ideas in the main section. After class, review those notes and write questions in the left-hand column. Then summarize the lesson at the bottom of the page. For example, if the lesson is about a student, classical conditioning, the student might write unconditioned stimulus, conditioned response, and generalization in the question column. The student could then cover the main notes and attempt to explain each concept from memory. This is important because Cornell notes are not simply pages to reread. They become a built-in study tool. You could also try the outline method. Outline method also works great. The outline method works well when a lecture has a clear structure. So students begin with the main topic, place really supporting ideas underneath it, and add examples or details below those ideas. So, for example, the main topic could be information literacy, supporting idea, evaluating sources, details, author expertise, publication date, evidence, bias, and purpose. And then the supporting ideas for that would be verifying claims, checking. And lastly, the detail is lateral reading, fact checking, and comparing multiple sources. This structure that helps students see relationships between ideas. It also prevents every fact from appearing equally important. However, outlines are less useful. When the material is highly visual, nonlinear, or it's very complicated, it may not work. Concept maps. Concept map can help when students need to understand how ideas influence one another. Place the central concept in the middle of the page. Add related concepts around it and use lines or arrows to show relationships. Students studying an ecosystem might connect plants to sunlight, animals to food sources, and human activity to environmental change. Students studying history might connect economic conditions, political decisions, social movements, and major events. I mean, concept maps are very useful, or like mind mapping, extremely useful. And they also expose shallow understanding. It's difficult to make a meaningful connection between two ideas if you do not know how they're related. So review notes shortly after class. Notes lose value when they disappear into a backpack. That's just a fact. Students should review their notes within 24 hours, even if the review lasts only 10 or 15 minutes. During this review, students should really correct unclear language, fill in missing information, add examples if you can. That always looks great. Identify confusing sections. Write possible test questions that are good. Summarize the lesson without copying. Excuse me. This short review, it really strengthens memory and prevents students from having to relearn the entire lesson before an examination. Because what happens to most students who come into class on the day of the test? Well, I didn't study, I forgot. So 10 minutes today literally can save an hour next week. The brain appreciates regular maintenance almost as much as a car does, and is considerably more expensive to replace. I know a lot of people think that rereading helps a lot, too much. But rereading is not enough. Rereading can create an illusion of learning. Information begins to look familiar, and the students interpret that familiarity as understanding. Recognition, however, is not the same as recall. A student may recognize the definition of a term when looking at the textbook, but be unable to explain it during an examination. The student knew the information only when the answer was visible. That was it. To learn more effectively, students must practice retrieving information without looking at it. Close the books. Have your students close their books and ask, what were the three main ideas? How would I explain this concept to someone else? Or what caused this event? What is the difference between say two theories? What evidence supports this conclusion? The effort involved is remembering part of the learning process. The effort involved is remembering part of the learning process. Use active recall. Active recall means deliberately bringing information to mind without immediately checking the answer. Students can really practice active recall with flashcards and self-created quizzes, practice, questions, blank page summaries, blah, blah. One particular effective strategy is the brain dump. Um, Take a blank sheet of paper, write down everything you can remember about the topic. Do not check your books or look to try to cheat. When finished, compare your responses with the course material and see how well you did. Information you remember confidently is probably becoming secure. Information you missed or explained incorrectly needs additional attention. This approach provides something rereading rarely provides. It's honest feedback. Um, I remember when, for me, cramming would help me for a few hours, but then everything would go away. Um, I'd forget everything. And so a better strategy is called the spaced practice. Instead of studying for 5 hours the night before an examination, study for shorter periods across several days. Review the material shortly after learning it and revisit it again before the assessment. Each time that students successfully retrieve information after beginning to forget it, the memory, it actually becomes stronger. Um, so a weekly plan might include Monday, review the new lesson. Wednesday, answer practice question without notes. Friday, explain the major concepts aloud. Sunday, complete a mixed review of current and earlier materials. This approach really does require a lot of planning, but it reduces stress and improves retention. When I was in college, it's hard because you have so many different things going on with activities and this and that. So it's hard to um, really, um, mix different types of problems. So this is all. Students often practice one type of problem repeatedly before moving to another. It can really build confidence, but it may not teach students how to recognize which method a new problem requires. In economics, the sciences, math, all these different things, they require different models to, come up with, answers. And so a mathematics student might practice equations, percentages, graphs, and a word problem. A history student might compare events from different periods, and a science student might alternate among definitions, diagrams, calculations, and experimental scenarios. Mixed practice is more difficult, but that difficulty can be productive. Um, Students must identify the nature of the problem before selecting a solution. Um, you know, as a college professor for us, we do expect students to know certain things, but you really can't. Um, you have to really teach students in middle school or earlier to start note taking, to, to set up a paper to to you can use the Cornell method with with an eighth grader very easily. Um, you just have to do it. Uh, Fifth grader too. they can draw inferences and come up with great ideas to write down that may be related. So try to think of where can this fit in, because students need to have notes. Students should not wait for teachers, faculty, or professors, whatever, to provide every review question. After each class, write 2 or 3 possible questions based on a lesson. Include different levels of thinking. A basic question might ask for a definition. A more advanced question might ask students to compare 2 theories. To compare or contrast is not easy. A higher level question really might present a new situation and ask students to apply what they've learned. And, these are all great ways to test our students. And we could ask them, for example, like, what is confirmation bias? How is confirmation bias different from motivated reasoning? How might confirmation bias influence the sources someone selects for a research paper or something? The third question requires more than memorization. It requires transfer. That's the ability to use knowledge in a new context. Basically, to take the concept from one idea and reapply it to a new idea. That's transference in education. Use technology really carefully. Digital tools can support note-taking and studying, but they can also create distractions. Applications can organize notes and generate like flashcards, schedule review, record lectures when permitted, and really help students create practice questions. Artificial intelligence can explain concepts, produce sample quizzes, and provide feedback. However, technology should support thinking, not replace it. Students should verify AI-generated explanations, protect private information, and avoid submitting generated work as their own. Most importantly, they should attempt to retrieve and explain information before asking technology to do it for them. If the tool performs all the thinking, the tool receives the practice. The student does not. So, after that, you want to try to start getting students into a realistic path to studying and using their notes. So I actually will see students taking notes, but then I don't use them. So during class, listen for structure and record the major ideas. Within 24 hours, review and clarify the notes. Several days later, practice recalling the information without looking. And before the examination, complete a mixed practice questions and focus on areas of weakness. Students should also work in an environment that supports the concentration. I do know some students that they put their earphones or earbuds and, they have all these things going on and they're doing their work at the same time. Silence unnecessarily is notification. Place the phone out of reach, take short breaks, take care of yourself. A focused 30-minute session can be accomplished more than 2 distracted hours. So remember, good note taking is not about producing beautiful pages. It's good studying is the student who can open the textbook or listen to you lecture and pull out the chunks. The goal really is learning. Students learn when they organize information, when they retrieve it from memory, explain it in their own words, connect it to other ideas, and apply it in new situations. Your notes, they should help you think. Your study sessions should challenge your memory. Your mistakes should show you what to work on next. I think I did a podcast a couple weeks ago where that was the thing is mistakes are not a bad thing. It's a winning thing. You have to get a grasp on how learning works and how to use your time well in order to get things done. So after your next class, do not simply close your notebook and forget about it. Review what you wrote, identify the central ideas, create a few questions, test yourself without looking at the answers. Study actively, study consistently, and make your brain do the work. I am Dr. Daniel A. Sale, and this has been The Cognitive Edge. Thank you for watching, and if this discussion really helped you in some way, please like the video, share it with a student or educator, and subscribe for more conversations about education, technology, libraries, and the science of learning, and many other topics we talk about. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.